The morning air hung cold and heavy over eastern Poland on August 24, 1944. 22-year-old Erich Hartmann stood beside his Messerschmitt Bf 109, running his hand along the fuselage as mechanics made final preparations. The black tulip markings on his aircraft had earned him a fearsome reputation among Soviet pilots who called him the Black Devil. But Hartmann wasn't thinking about his reputation that morning. He was thinking about survival, about tactics, and about a maneuver that veteran pilots had once mocked him for attempting. 2 years earlier, on October 14, 1942, Hartmann had been an eager young pilot on his first combat mission. His squadron leader, Edmund Rossmann, had spotted 10 Soviet aircraft and urged caution, but Hartmann, filled with the invincibility of youth, had opened his throttle and charged straight at the enemy fighters. What happened next became a story whispered in the barracks as a cautionary tale. Hartmann fired every round of ammunition he had in one continuous burst and missed completely. Not a single bullet found its target. He came so close to the enemy aircraft that he nearly collided with it and suddenly found himself surrounded by Soviet fighters trying to shoot him down. Only by diving into the clouds did he escape with his life. The humiliation burned. Fellow pilots chuckled about the hotshot who couldn't hit anything, but Hartmann didn't let embarrassment defeat him. Instead, he watched. He learned. He studied every veteran pilot he could find, absorbing their wisdom like a sponge. One of those veterans was his squadron leader Rossmann, who had been injured and couldn't fly in demanding dogfights anymore. Rossmann had developed a different approach. Stand back, evaluate the situation, select a target that wasn't taking evasive action, and destroy it at extremely close range. Hartmann took this lesson and refined it into something revolutionary. While other pilots fired from 300 yards away, hoping their bullets would find the target, Hartmann developed a principle that became his personal motto. When the enemy fills your entire windscreen, you cannot miss. It sounded insane. It was insane. Flying that close meant you risked collision, meant you could be hit by debris from your own kill, meant you had almost no room for error. But it worked. He developed a complete tactical system that he called See, Decide, Attack, Reverse. First, observe the enemy from a distance. Second, make a tactical decision about which target to engage and how. Third, execute the attack with brutal precision. Fourth, immediately disengage and escape before other enemy fighters could respond. This wasn't the glamorous dogfighting that movies would later celebrate. This was calculated, methodical killing that prioritized survival and effectiveness over glory. But there was another element to Hartmann's tactics that other pilots found even more controversial. He would deliberately enter what appeared to be a low-altitude stall during certain maneuvers. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, despite its reputation as a deadly fighter, had peculiar stall characteristics. At extremely low speeds, around 68 knots in clean configuration, the aircraft would enter a gentle buffet before breaking into a stall. Most pilots feared this condition, especially at low altitude where recovery room was minimal. But Hartmann had discovered something remarkable during his countless hours of combat experience. When attacking low-flying Soviet ground attack aircraft, particularly the heavily armored Il-2 Sturmovix, Hartmann would dive beneath them and then pull up hard, bringing his aircraft to the edge of a stall. In this unusual attitude, with his nose pointing almost straight up and his speed bleeding away dangerously, he could fire directly into the vulnerable underside of the enemy aircraft, specifically targeting the engine and fuel tanks from below. It was during one of these maneuvers that another pilot had first laughed at him, watching from a distance as Hartmann's aircraft seemed to hang motionless in the air, apparently losing control. The laughter stopped when Hartmann's target erupted in flames and crashed, But the maneuver had a cost. On that particular occasion, debris from the exploding Sturmovik hit Hartmann's engine, and with no altitude to spare, he had to crash land immediately. It became a pattern. Hartmann would force himself to crash land 16 times during his career, but remarkably, he was never shot down by direct enemy fire. Every crash resulted from mechanical failure or damage from debris of aircraft he had destroyed. By August 1944, Hartmann was no longer the butt of jokes. He had become the most feared fighter pilot on the Eastern Front. Soviet intelligence had identified his radio call sign, Karaya-1, and placed a bounty of 10,000 rubles on his head. Soviet pilots who heard that call sign on their radios knew they were in mortal danger. Hartmann had already accumulated over 290 confirmed victories, and everyone had been verified through the Luftwaffe's rigorous confirmation system, which required either photographic evidence, witness testimony from other pilots, or wreckage located on the ground. On August 23, 1944, the day before his legendary achievement, Hartmann had already demonstrated his deadly efficiency by shooting down 8 Soviet aircraft in 3 separate missions. He was exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination, but the war showed no signs of slowing down. The Soviet summer offensive was pushing German forces back across Poland, and the skies were filled with enemy aircraft. The morning of August 24th began with a routine patrol mission. Hartmann led his flight of 4 Bf-109s toward the frontline area between Radom and Lublin. The intelligence briefing had warned of heavy Soviet air activity, and Hartmann knew they would find targets. What he didn't know was that he was about to achieve something that would echo through aviation history. At approximately 10,000 feet, Hartmann spotted the enemy formation. It was massive, far larger than anything his small flight should engage according to standard doctrine. Soviet fighters and ground attack aircraft filled the sky, flying in loose formations as they headed toward German positions. Any rational commander would have radioed for reinforcements or avoided contact entirely. But Hartmann had learned that hesitation in combat was often more dangerous than action. He studied the formation carefully, his exceptional eyesight picking out details that other pilots would miss. This was the C phase of his tactical system. He noted the spacing between aircraft, their altitude, their speed, their formation discipline. He was looking for weakness, for the moment of opportunity that would allow him to strike and escape before the enemy could respond effectively. Then he made his decision. Rather than attacking the formation head-on or from behind, Hartmann positioned his flight above and to the side, using the sun to mask their approach. He selected his first target with care, a Soviet fighter that had drifted slightly away from its formation, its pilot probably scanning the sky in the wrong direction. This was textbook Hartmann, exploiting a momentary lapse in enemy awareness. The dive was steep and fast. Hartmann's Bf-109 accelerated rapidly as gravity added to the power of its Daimler-Benz engine. He closed the distance with terrifying speed, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. 200 yards, 100 yards, 50 yards. The enemy aircraft grew larger in his windscreen. He could see rivets on the fuselage, could see the pilot in the cockpit. At point-blank range, Hartmann fired a short, precise burst. The effect was devastating. Cannon shells and machine gun rounds tore into the Soviet fighter at almost zero deflection. There was no possibility of missing at this range. The enemy aircraft shuddered, began trailing smoke, and fell away. Hartmann didn't watch it crash. He was already scanning for his next target, already executing the reverse phase of his tactic, breaking away hard to avoid other enemy fighters. But something unusual happened that morning. Instead of the Soviet formation responding with coordinated aggression, their discipline seemed to break down. Perhaps they had heard the dreaded Karaya-1 call sign on their radios. Perhaps the sudden violent loss of their comrade had rattled them. Whatever the reason, Hartmann saw opportunity. He pulled his aircraft around in a tight turn, feeling the G-forces pressing him into his seat, compressing his vision at the edges. His squadron mates called out warnings and positions over the radio, maintaining formation discipline even as chaos erupted around them. Hartmann selected his second target and attacked again with the same ruthless precision, then a third, then a fourth. Each attack followed the same pattern, close to point-blank range, short, accurate burst, immediate disengagement. It was aerial combat, reduced to its most efficient, most lethal form. There was no prolonged dogfighting, no aerobatic maneuvering for position, just ambush, execution, and escape. Within minutes, Hartmann had shot down 6 Soviet aircraft in a single engagement. His wingman protected him brilliantly, keeping other Soviet fighters off his tail as he worked through the enemy formation with mechanical precision. This was another key to Hartmann's success. He never lost a wingman during his entire combat career, a record that he considered more important than his kill count. He protected his men, and they protected him, creating a mutual trust that was essential for survival. When his ammunition finally ran low, Hartmann led his flight away from the combat area and headed back to base. As they approached the airfield, Hartmann performed a quick victory roll, the customary signal that the mission had been successful. Ground crews counted the rolls and began preparing the victory markers that would be painted on his aircraft. 6 confirmed kills in a single mission was an exceptional achievement, the kind of success that would make headlines. But Hartmann wasn't finished. After landing, refueling, and rearming, he was back in the air within hours for a second mission. The Soviet offensive continued, and German forces needed every advantage they could get. This time, the mission profile was different. Intelligence had located a formation of Soviet ground attack aircraft heading toward German armored positions. These were the heavily armored Il-2 Sturmovix, the flying tanks that had earned a fearsome reputation for their ability to survive damage and destroy ground targets. Engaging Sturmovix was dangerous work. Their armor could withstand incredible punishment, and they were typically escorted by fighters. But Hartmann had developed specific tactics for dealing with these tough opponents. Tactics that involved the controversial low-altitude stall maneuver that had once drawn mockery from his peers. Hartmann found the Soviet formation at low altitude, exactly where Sturmovix operated most effectively. They were flying in a loose gaggle, preparing to attack German positions. Hartmann positioned his flight for the attack, then dove beneath the enemy formation. This was the critical moment. He needed to get underneath the Sturmovix, where their armor was thinnest, but doing so meant giving up altitude and energy, leaving himself vulnerable. As he pulled up beneath the first Sturmovik, Hartmann's aircraft seemed to hang in the air, nose pointing almost straight up, speed bleeding away rapidly. To observers, it looked like he was about to stall and fall out of the sky, but Hartmann had practiced this maneuver countless times. He knew exactly how much energy he had, exactly how long he could hold this attitude before the stall became unrecoverable. In that moment of apparent vulnerability, with his aircraft balanced on the edge of aerodynamic control, Hartmann fired directly into the Sturmovik's belly. His rounds punched through the thinner lower armor and found the engine. The Soviet aircraft began trailing black smoke and turned eastward, trying to reach friendly territory. Hartmann rolled away, recovered from his near-stall condition, and selected his next target. Over and over, he repeated the maneuver. Dive beneath the enemy formation, pull up into the dangerous near-stall attitude, fire with precision, recover and reposition. It was physically demanding work, requiring perfect coordination and split-second timing. One mistake, one moment of hesitation or miscalculation, and he would stall at low altitude with no room for recovery. But Hartmann didn't make mistakes. Not that day. One by one, Soviet aircraft fell from the sky, victims of his unorthodox but devastatingly effective tactics. His wingmen protected his flanks, engaging the Soviet fighter escorts and keeping them away from Hartmann as he worked through the bomber formation. When Hartmann finally ran out of ammunition again and headed for base, he had added 5 more confirmed kills to his tally. Combined with his morning mission, he had shot down 11 enemy aircraft in a single day, completing 2 separate missions against numerically superior forces and returning without a scratch on his aircraft. As word of Hartmann's achievement spread through the Luftwaffe, the response was electric. 11 kills in one day wasn't just exceptional, it was unprecedented. It became known as a double ace in a day achievement, surpassing even the most optimistic expectations. Hartmann's total victory count now stood at 301, making him the highest-scoring fighter ace in the world, surpassing his mentor and friend Gerhard Barkhorn. The German propaganda machine seized on Hartmann's achievement, but for the young pilot himself, it was simply another day of survival. He had long ago stopped counting his victories with any sense of triumph. Each kill meant he would live to see another day, would return to his base, would have another chance to protect his wingmen and his country. The romance of aerial combat had died for Hartmann during his early missions. What remained was duty, skill, and the grim determination to survive. The tactical innovations that Hartmann demonstrated on August 24, 1944, particularly his willingness to exploit the edge of his aircraft's performance envelope even when it appeared reckless, represented a revolution in fighter tactics. While other pilots maintained comfortable margins of safety, Hartmann operated in the razor-thin gap between maximum effectiveness and disaster. His deep understanding of his aircraft's characteristics, gained through thousands of hours of combat flying, allowed him to do things that seemed impossible to observers. The low-altitude stall maneuver, the tactic that had once drawn laughter and skepticism, proved to be one of his most effective weapons. By appearing to lose control, by flying in a way that seemed suicidal to conventional thinking, Hartmann created opportunities that other pilots couldn't even perceive. It was aerial combat judo, using apparent weakness as strength, transforming vulnerability into advantage. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 that Hartmann flew that day was not a particularly forgiving aircraft. It had a narrow landing gear that made ground handling tricky. It required constant rudder input to counter torque effects, and its stall characteristics could be abrupt if mishandled. But in Hartmann's hands, the 109 became an extension of his will, a weapon that he understood completely and could push to its absolute limits. In the days following his unprecedented achievement, Hartmann was summoned to meet Adolf Hitler at the Wolf's Lair headquarters in Rastenburg. There, he was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, Germany's highest military decoration. Only 27 men received this award during the entire war. During the meeting, Hitler asked Hartmann's opinion about the war situation, and the young pilot spoke frankly about problems with pilot training and aircraft production. Hitler, in a rare moment of honesty, admitted that the war was militarily lost. Despite this grim assessment, Hartmann continued flying combat missions until the final day of the war. He was asked to join the Me-262 jet fighter program, which represented Germany's last hope for air superiority, but he declined. He preferred to stay with his unit, JG-52, and with the men who had become his brothers in combat. His loyalty to his wingmen remained absolute. By the war's end on May 8, 1945, Hartmann's total victory count had reached an astonishing 352 confirmed kills, a record that no pilot has ever approached in the decades since. His achievement on August 24, 1944, shooting down 11 aircraft in a single day, remains one of the most remarkable feats of aerial combat in military history. And it was all accomplished using tactics that had once been dismissed as foolish, maneuvers that appeared to defy common sense, flying at the edge of control where other pilots feared to go. The story of Erich Hartmann is not a simple tale of heroism. He fought for a cause that history has rightfully condemned, but his tactical innovations, his understanding of aerial combat, and his achievement on that single day in August 1944 remain historically significant. They demonstrate how deeply understanding your equipment, being willing to challenge conventional wisdom, and having the courage to operate at the edge of performance can create opportunities that others cannot imagine. The pilots who had laughed when they first saw Hartmann enter that low-altitude stall never laughed again. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A young man who turned apparent weakness into devastating strength, who transformed a dangerous maneuver into a precision weapon, and who proved that sometimes the most effective tactics are the ones that make other people nervous. After the war, Hartmann was captured by Soviet forces and spent 10 years in brutal prison camps, enduring torture and psychological abuse. The Soviets wanted him to work for East Germany, but he refused. He was finally released in 1955 and returned to West Germany, where he joined the new Bundesluftwaffe. He eventually became a colonel, but resigned in 1970 after disagreements with his superiors about aircraft procurement, particularly his opposition to the F-104 starfighter, which he correctly believed was fundamentally flawed and dangerous. Hartmann died on September 20, 1993, at age 71, nearly 50 years after his incredible achievement. In 1997, 4 years after his death, Russia formally exonerated him, acknowledging that his wartime conviction had not been lawful. His legacy remains complex, but his tactical innovations and his achievement on August 24, 1944, stand as testament to what human skill, courage, and determination can accomplish. The lesson of Hartmann's story extends beyond aerial combat. It reminds us that conventional wisdom isn't always correct, that apparent weaknesses can sometimes be transformed into strengths, and that mastery of your craft can open possibilities that others cannot perceive. When everyone else sees disaster, true mastery sees opportunity. Those who laughed when they first saw Hartmann deliberately enter that low-altitude stall, dancing on the edge of control with his nose pointed skyward and his speed bleeding away, learned a lesson that day. They learned that sometimes the most dangerous pilot is the one who understands their machine so completely that they can operate in the narrow space between effectiveness and disaster, where others dare not go. 11 enemy aircraft, 2 missions, 1 day, and a tactical innovation that changed how fighter pilots thought about aerial combat. That's the legacy of August 24, 1944, the day Erich Hartmann proved that the maneuver they had mocked was actually a stroke of genius. What do you think about Hartmann's revolutionary tactics? Could his approach to aerial combat teach us something about challenging conventional wisdom today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you want, tell me from which part of the world you're watching this video. Your comment matters, and I want to read it and reply. For more exciting stories like this one, click on the video appearing on your screen right now.